Okay guys, today we are going to learn how to shade a face. So if you're in class, you're going to get a handout that looks like this. If you are not at home, or if you are at home, I'm going to upload a picture of this that you can, if you have a printer available, you can print off and do. If not, you're going to need to kind of sketch you out a face to do. So following the steps that we did yesterday on facial proportions, just try to draw something similar or close to this as you can. I understand it won't be perfect, but you'll have to draw your own little face to do. So if you have to do that, go ahead and pause this and then come back to the video whenever you have that done. But what we're going to use today is obviously our handout. I've got a regular pencil and then like a 2B and a 4B, which you don't have to use these if you don't have them. It's fine. You could just use your regular pencil. And then I have a couple different sizes of blending stick, tissue paper for smoothing out if I need it, and then an eraser just because my regular one doesn't have one. So anyways, that's what we're going to be doing. So when we were talking about our normal shading, just during our normal lessons of overshading last semester, we talked about, or I had mentioned, that anything that is rounded is going to have a shadow around the edge that kind of fades in just to kind of show that it curves around. So what we're going to start with is basically a shadow that fades around the edge of our face, okay? Now, for those of you that are familiar with makeup and contouring of makeup, you're going to kind of follow those same rules as when you shade a face, basically where you put your dark color is where you're putting your shadows on your face. That's exactly what contouring makeup is adding shadows to your face or adding highlights. And in this case, we will just leave our highlights light as we shade. So anyways, we're going to start by applying. I'm going to use more of a blended pencil point and a blended pencil side technique to sort of apply my pencil to my face. Now I can always go back and darken this if I need to, so I'm not going to go super heavy. I'm definitely not going to start with one of my dark shading pencils, okay? But we're also going to have like a shadow on our forehead where our hair overlaps our face, so yeah, everybody's going to need to have a shadow there as well. So I'm going to kind of it's easier just to rotate my paper sometimes, so that's what I'm going to do. Feel free to do that too. So I'm going to start. Again, the blending sticks, they don't work unless you have graphite on the paper already or you have graphite loaded up on your blending stick, which will probably be a technique we use in some other spots of this worksheet. I don't know how, let me zoom in a little bit. It's really bright outside, so my windows are bringing in a bunch of light. The camera's not picking up my value as much as I would like it to. Got a little smudge up here. Like that. So I've got just like a base kind of shading around my face with my pencil. Now I'm going to take you could take your small one if you want to right along the edges, but I'll probably use that smaller one later, and then I'm going to come around and I'm going to kind of just buff out. Again, I like to use that circular motion when I blend on skin. I feel like it, I've said it before, gives it more of that skin kind of blotchy look, I guess, if you look at skin close up, but you don't have to. I mean, that's kind of a mixture, I guess, of what I do. I kind of do a mixture of strokes and circular motions, whatever works for you. But I'm going to blend that, and I'm not going to just blend it where, a little bit closer. There we go. I think you can see that a little bit better. I'm not going to just blend it to smooth over my strokes. I am pulling, anytime you blend, you need to pull that shadow out away from where you started, okay? So that you have that smooth transition. You don't want your shadow to just stop, okay? There's only rare instances we have a shadow that just stops really hard with edge. Miss Isabella's in here cleaning my room. So if y'all hear that noise, that's what's going on. Okay, so I've got a pretty good fade all the way around my face. Okay, I could go ahead and I'll just go ahead and do the neck too because we're going to do similar shading there. So I'm going to start with my pencil and I'm going to fade, kind of apply that. Now my neck, right, and I'm going to do it under my jaw too. You're welcome. I'm going to have a little darker shadow right under my chin, so I'm going to go around there as well, and I'll probably go a little heavier on my shadow. Not too much. So again, I can always darken it if I need to. Can't always lighten it as much as I need to, though, if I go too heavy to start with. So again, okay, so I'm going to kind of apply that shadow and then smooth it out. Right here might be a good time to get out the little tiny blending stick. So I don't really want that dark shadow to pull too much onto my chin. So I'm going to use that little one right there, and then I'll go back and I'll use that big one to kind of pull it lower on my neck. I want to get a little bit close. I want to be a little bit more careful along my edges. That's why we have these little tiny ones. Okay, so I've got that, so I'm going to go back to this now. Now, if you need to also get in the habit, like if you accidentally say you smear on the outside of your edges here, you need to go back and clean that up later. Okay, that's just good craftsmanship. Not just for when we're doing people, for when we're doing any kind of shading. All right, so I'm gonna fade that. To be honest, like really in any shading you have, especially on a face, like the only thing that should be pure white is probably the highlight in your eye. Everything else is going to be a value of gray. Really subtle light gray for your light values, and you know, it just kind of goes darker from there. But that's really it. So I have a kind of a gray tone, a really light gray. I have a little bit of a white highlight right here, but yeah, the only pure white should be the highlight of your eyes. So try to get a little bit of gray, and if you need to, like I'm going to go back and I'm going to kind of just smooth this over a little bit. If I start too early with my tissue, I feel like it kind of picks up some of my, you can kind of see it better if I block out some of that light. It will pick up maybe too much of my graphite, and then it won't really blend where I need it to. So I don't want to start too early with my tissue. Okay. So, all right. So zooming back out, I might have that a little too dark on the edges over here. Really just kind of depends on where your light source is coming from. But you do want it darker under the chin. Okay, moving on. I don't want to spend too much time on the neck because our face is going to take more time. So we have the sides of our face here, and we're going to go ahead and let's start where we learned where to shade our eyes. Okay, that was the first lesson we did, so I'm going to zoom in nice and close here. So when we're shading our eyes, we know we have this crease of our eye, okay, and we're going to have this shadow that kind of starts along that line and fades up to our eyebrow bone, okay? So I got to apply some pencil here, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing over here. I don't know if you can hear that banging. They're on my roof right now, fixing the roof. So lots of sound effects today. All right, so I've got just a little bit of shading with my pencil there. So now I'm going to take my little tiny blending stick, and if you don't have a blending stick, just use your pinky and a tissue if you can. And that's kind of dark. That's not, it may not be as dark once I get it faded up. Because we do have our eye sockets right here, so we have this shadow. And I'm going to kind of let that shadow sort of blend next to my bridge of my nose, okay? Now, if you remember when we did eyes, let me see if I got my my eye example from the other day. We have this kind of like highlight right here. So I'm going to try to work around that just a little bit. It won't be as noticeable, obviously, because we're not as of a close-up. And the detail, the little lines and stuff in our eye here, we're not going to really see those either. But we will still have that value change there. So I'm going to kind of just let that fade. I'm going to kind of let it buff out and fade over here too. I'll come back and finish that out. Go ahead and do this side. Now, the more you work with graphite, the more you're going to probably realize that when you rest your hands on your paper and you already have a bunch of graphite on your paper, your hand, if you haven't realized this already, your skin's going to grab that graphite. So, and you might smear it. So if you are in the habit of resting your hand on your artwork, you might put a scrap paper under your hand to let it rest on so you don't smear. Or just get in the habit of keeping your hand lifted off of your paper. Okay, so again, I'm going to kind of bring my shadow here. Now, again, we don't really, this was drawn on for the printout, but in real life, we're going to draw this line super light here because the bridge of our nose, we don't have like hard lines on our nose like we do our eye, not for our bridge anyways. So this is, again, this is just kind of a shading indicator as to where my shadow and highlight is going to kind of start for my nose. Goodness, lost my train of thought. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'll go ahead and use my pencil. So I'm going to very, very lightly fade. I don't want this to be too dark, okay? So I'm just going to very, very lightly add some more graphite to my paper right here. And if y'all remember how we shaded our nose, we're going to pull this shadow out away from our nose here. Okay. And we're not quite done with our eyes. I'm kind of slowly working there. Might as well just kind of continue the shadow. Okay. So I'm going to kind of buff that out, and if you need to, you can use a tissue to soften edges. But then I'm also going to, if you'll remember, I'm going to try to just use the graphite that's already on my blending stick. I'm going to pull that shadow into my bridge, or onto my bridge just a little bit. Those of you that are familiar with contouring, this would be kind of where you add that darker tone on your nose to make it look slimmer, and then what's left is kind of where you might highlight your nose. So, okay, so I'm trying to leave a little bit of white under my eye as I buff this out, because we have that kind of, we're not really highlighting this because we're not close enough to see that little water line there, but we do have like kind of it's really subtle on my handout here. We have kind of a highlight on our lower lid too, and then it kind of dips in slightly under it. But it's just, for us, for younger people, it's supposed to be really subtle, so I'm trying not to make it super dark right there. So anyways, we can go ahead and finish shading our nose. So we have this little line here. Again, this would be a really, not a dark line. It would be more of a soft line, but just to kind of show us where we can add some more shadows if we need to. Depending on how round the nose is. I don't like how tall I brought that shadow up, so I'm going to release that some. And then we have a shadow under here. And I like to kind of connect almost my circle there. Now I know I'm probably moving fast for some of y'all. You're all always welcome to pause. But don't forget this little shadow on the bottom of your nose. Okay? That makes a pretty big difference, as well as shading, kind of just like we added a little shadow on the edge of our bridge, we're going to add a little shadow on the edge of our nostril too. So I'm going to kind of, I feel like my shadows have kind of an edge or a stopping point, so I'm going to try to soften that up. a little bit more, and you can make by that shadow however round you want this nose to look. You can kind of slip it down by adding more of a shadow there if you want. But again, people get into their head thinking when they're drawing their nose, they're drawing it too big. But once you add your shadows, it will look right. So don't worry about drawing your nose too big. Shadows slim. Okay, so I'm now darkening my nostrils here too. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and maybe come back to the eyes here a little bit. So I'm not going to apply because I want these shadows to be really subtle. I'm going to kind of leave a gap kind of around my lower lid here. I'm going to try to connect. Now, where our temples are, we have like a little indentation, and so that kind of gives us this little shadow here that sort of divides our forehead and our cheekbone, where it kind of dips in just a little bit. So I'm going to kind of connect my eyebrow shadow into my side shadow of the side of my face, and then I'm going to kind of do the same thing with my lower lid. Okay. I'm going to try to keep that very soft. I don't want it to look like a raccoon, okay? So if yours is looking too dark and too raccoony, you're probably just adding too much. You might take a tissue and just kind of soften that blend a little. We don't want a mask. So we also might want to, again, depending on the person, you probably have kind of like a little kind of crease here where that top eyelid sort of folds. You would probably have like a little tiny shadow there. And then that would also kind of connect into this shadow. But now I'll go ahead and finish shading my eye, just like I taught you guys the other day. We're going to have, I didn't really draw them in very good. You might have to darken those lines back up. I have that little carbuncle. That's what that's called, that little pink squishy spot is a carbuncle, oddly enough. I'm going to add those little shadows to the eyes in the corner there. Okay. And then that top eyelid has a bit of a shadow on the eye too. And we have a little one at the bottom because it sinks under, and it's a rounded object, and we've already talked about rounded objects have a shadow along all the edges. So even our whites of our eyes should be a little bit gray from our shading. Okay. And then we have, we're not going to see the detail. If you want to try putting in all that detail, you can, by all means. I'm going to go ahead and darken in the pupil. I already have my highlight drawn in there, so I'm just going to kind of keep around my highlight. But we would have kind of a darker shadow right around the edge there. And then we would also kind of have one around the middle too. Let's see if I can, I might have to pop a little bit more. And so right there. I don't want to go darker than my pupil though. So, that looks a little too dark. I'm going to erase that back out. So again, it just kind of depends on how much space you have to work in. I wouldn't worry about that darker tone that we know is close to the pupil when we're this far back. I would just do really dark purple, or not purple, dark pupil, a darker ring on the outside, and then kind of just sort of fade it in. Don't color it in. There should still be a little bit of a value change in there. And then just make sure you don't go over your highlight. Okay. If you want, you can add lashes. You don't have to right now. If you're doing a male, you probably don't want to add lashes. Even though we all know that they have them. I feel like always when I draw them on, they just make them look more feminine. So it's your preference, though. That's just my preference. I don't like to add them when I'm doing a male character. If we have time, I might go back, but I don't think I'm really going to have time during this lesson. Okay, so I've got my shadows on my corners, my edges. Darken my pupil. Darken my outer ring. So this face is just another kind of generic, doesn't really have it's just a human, doesn't really have a gender. It's just a face. Okay, so there, I've got, well, this eye's not quite all the way done because I haven't gone and finished out the shading around it. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of finish sort of my shadow under the eye. I'll go ahead and kind of add my crease in my eyelid here. And this kind of depends on the person too. You know, some people don't have a defined kind of crease like that, some do. But now you at least know how to do it if you do, or someone else that you're doing it does. So now I'm going to connect, remember that temple over here where we have that little kind of flat spot on the side of her face. So I'm adding that shadow and just using my blending stick, kind of defining that shadow so I see where my forehead ends and my cheekbone begins. Okay. So again, if you're going too dark, it's not going to look right. You really want to keep your grays pretty subtle. So zooming out, not too out, there we go, my camera's adjusting. So depending on how defined you want the cheekbones to be, you could come in here and you could add a bit more shadow. And I think I'm going to, just so that y'all know how to, just kind of keep in mind, where does that cheekbone go? Wherever you leave a highlight is where the cheekbones will be, you know. So I'm going to kind of carry this in a little bit more and making the shadow on the side of the face come in a little bit lower. Really subtle. Okay. So if you're thinking of like a skeleton, this is kind of how I remember a skeleton. They have you can see their bone structure, and then it kind of drops down where their jaw and teeth are. That's kind of what I sort of imagine whenever I'm placing my shadows right here. Is I kind of go sort of what it would look like as if it was just a skeleton there, just to give myself a guide. You can kind of see better when I block out some of that light. Okay. So now let's go back to the nose and kind of the lip area. So we are going to have our, I still don't know what this is called. It's not the Cupid's bow, but we have this little spot in between our nose. And now remember, we talked about having this highlight that stays above our upper lip. Okay. So I'm trying to not get into that. But I'm going to kind of continue my shadow from the bottom of my nose. And I'm going to kind of let that merge into here. I should probably need to darken this up a little bit. And then I'm going to You can always go back and add this in with an eraser if you need to. And I might fix it. I don't really care for the shape I just did, so I'll probably go back and adjust that later. But I'm gonna just carry down my shading that I did on my lip the other day, connecting the shadow from under my nose into it. Okay. And you actually will probably kind of continue to connect like a shadow. So like this is still not quite dark enough under here. The sides of our nostrils probably need a little bit more shadow there, because that actually does have a pretty hard kind of shadow right behind those. And then this is going to kind of fade in, like if you're going to, you see people that have like those laugh lines. So the shadow kind of sort of connects into that. Now you don't have to define that laugh line very harshly, especially again for younger people. Older people, they're going to probably have that defined a little bit more. I'm kind of get my bigger one here and try to buff that out a little bit. Or you can get your tissue if you want. And I kind of try to subtly connect my shading from the side of my nose to the side of my face. But I try to keep it sort of at a rounder. You don't want it to look like a 5 o'clock shadow. So if you just gotta, again, you gotta find that kind of happy medium blend going. So that's why I'm going to go back and kind of hit it with my tissue to sort of smooth out that texture. Because right there, around the mouth and stuff, it will look like a beard, that rounded buffing. So I like to still apply it to get started, and then I kind of go back and smooth it out. So that's sort of, again, it's kind of connected. It's really subtle, really subtle. Let me block out some light, see if you can see it a little bit better. It's really subtle there. So let's go ahead and finish our lips here. So we learned that we do, being this close up, we probably would see some of this lip texture. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. Remember, you're going to do overlapping strokes, slowly, gradually change direction. As you get to the middle, the more curve you have in your strokes, the more voluptuous your lips will look. Okay. Okay, and then remember, our top lip is usually always overall darker than our bottom lip because of the way the light hits our face. So I'm going to go back again. I'm using my little blending stick, and I'm applying it in the directions I put my pencils. That way it doesn't really knock out all of my texture. Okay. I will still have a bit of a shadow that kind of runs right at the bottom of my lips. And then this will also kind of shadow. I'm not going to go into full detail on this because that's not what this lesson's about. So moving on to the shadow below my lip. So I'm going to kind of get a good sort of proximity shadow right below. I feel like that makes the lips pop out more when you have that strong shadow right under the lip line. But usually kind of goes, it sort of depends on the shape of your chin. So in this instance, if I do like a kind of a rounded curve there, which that's probably a bit dark, I'm going to go back and lighten up. But if I do a little bit of a rounded curve right there, it's going to give my chin more of a rounded feel. If I don't, it's going to be more of a flat feel. So everybody probably has a little bit of a curve right there. So just how big of a curve makes it, kind of determines how big of a, or how round your chin is. I'm going to kind of try to lighten that up a little bit. I'm tapping that with my eraser to pick up some of that. Let me zoom out some. The camera adjust. I don't really like how wide I did that. That's probably too round, but I don't have time to go back and fix that. Okay, so we have our chin, we have our jaw, we have our neck, we have our nose, our lips, our eyes. Okay, so let's talk about, well, you can go back and draw in your eyebrows. That makes a big difference too. Again, males will probably have more bushy eyebrows. Females will have more slender eyebrows, but I'm not really worried about those right now because I've already done this lesson. But they'll look a little bit better once you put in those eyebrows. Okay, close enough for today. So our ears, we're going to, for females, most of the time our hair kind of covers them, but we're not going to do a whole bunch with ears, so I usually just kind of add in sort of this curve here for the cartilage, and then maybe like a little knob there for that other little piece that's there. I don't know the names of our ear parts. Oh, tragus, I think, actually. Or targus, something like that. So I'm going to go back and add some shadows. Even if you don't think you'll have to do the ears in your project, go ahead and learn how to do this because you never know. You might have to do an ear in your sketchbook assignment. Actually, I think there are some ears in this month's sketchbook assignment. I'm going to smooth that out with my blending stick. And then because it's rounded, I'm going to hit the edge of my ear with it too. I have to come back and grab some more graphite if your blending stick has ran out. Okay. So ears are pretty, from the front, they're pretty easy. Again, we're not going to spend much time on those. All right, so I think the last thing we need to talk about is hair. Hair, I have just this very simple, generic set of hair right now. The trick to hair is drawing it in large chunks, not drawing it in strands. Okay, so I have like this big chunk of hair here, and I have this big chunk of hair here. So if you want to define it a little bit, you can add in some more kind of pieces. For girls, it's going to probably kind of come down. But seriously, drawing in chunks, this is how you need to start your stuff. And then you're going to shade each chunk like it's its own individual shape. And then you can go back and add in some hair texture. And so I think I only have time to kind of show you one piece. So, because the bell's about to ring. So I'm going to try to kind of show you how to do this simply. So I'm going to shade this one chunk of hair. It's going to get darker when it goes behind my ears, okay? Oh, there's my warning bell. So anyways, so I'm going to kind of apply my shading to that. I'm going to buff out my shading. So each piece would have a highlight and a shadow, okay? So if I was doing ringlets, like wherever that ringlet curves back, there's going to be a shadow, but wherever it's curving out towards the viewer, there would be a highlight. So that's kind of the basics of, you would shade each piece, and then if you want to add in some more texture, you can. Does that make sense? I hope it does. If it doesn't, ask me in class or email me if you're at home. So there's that. Something else, I will go ahead and I'm going to pretend like we have longer hair over here, because I know a bunch of you guys are going to, or a bunch of you are going to have to deal with the longer hair. So let's just pretend like we have this longer hair here. We have this strand that flows in the front. So this is going to catch a highlight, but when we have this empty space in the back behind, you know, like where it's really dark, we got to get really dark in there. All right. So we want to get, especially next to the face, we want to get it really dark. And then you probably wouldn't really see hair texture in there. But that's kind of how you would do that. And say this piece is tucking, you know, back here. Like this one's in front, so it's catching more highlight. I'm showing you a little bit more than one piece. But again, each piece has its own highlight and shadow because you're drawing them as individual shapes. Okay, again, I'm rushing. It's not as good as I would like it to be, but I am almost out of time. So if this piece is in front of this piece, there's going to be a shadow back there. Okay? Does that make sense? And then again, you shade, and then you add in your texture. So, fast and furious lesson. Let me know if y'all have any questions.